Everyone, Happy New Year. Apologies for my voice and probably my appearance today. I'm suffering with allergy. That said, let's plough on with the work. Item 1's attendance. All 8 cabinet members are here, I believe. So, yeah, I can count to 8 still. So item 2 is irrelevant then, apologies for absence. Which brings us to item 3, declarations of interest. Dennis?
Thank you, Lead. I'm not aware of any interest to declare. Thank you.
Is everyone happy with that? No interest to declare? That's great. Item 4 then is the confirmation of the Cabinet minutes from the 19th of November. We'll just open those up. Take us through those. Page 1, page 2, and then the Welsh language version is on page 3 and page 4. Is everyone happy with those as a true and accurate record? That's great. Close that one then, and move us on to agenda item 5, updates on actions. I understand there's no outstanding actions. Okay, item 6 then is the Financial Monitoring 1920 and Revenue Budget 2021 report. If I first hand over to Kelly.
Thank you. This report sets out the latest revenue budget forecast for 2019-20 and looks at the initial estimate 2020-21 position and the next steps in our budget setting process. It's a lengthy report that takes members through all the activities that have taken place over the year as we work towards setting the 2020-2021 budget. Before I look at 2020-21, I just wanted to talk about the monitoring position and highlight that it remains challenging, particularly as I've mentioned previously in Cabinet in terms of social care and housing and neighbourhood services. There's a lot of work ongoing in these areas to address the position, and the report also sets out a number of actions that are proposed to address the forecast pressures moving forward. As we look forward, though, to 2020-2021, I just wanted to thank everyone involved for their work during what has been a really difficult budget to prepare, given the political uncertainty and the general election in December, which has just thrown everything out. The provisional settlement for Torfaen was better than expected at 4.5%, and this, I'm pleased to say, will give us an opportunity to avoid cuts that would damage services and to propose in this report that as a council we help our schools to meet their financial pressures of 3.4 million in full. Whilst the settlement is good news, I am mindful that it's a one-year settlement and is against a backdrop of 10 years of austerity, so it's vital now that we work through the detail over the coming weeks, ensuring that we continue to move forward on a sustainable footing. Like I said, it's a lengthy report, so I'll hand over to Nigel now, who'll go through all the detail. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you, Kelly. The strangest and most difficult budgets, I would say. Developing in a vacuum. We have got a challenging in-year financial position. We need to also just keep in the back of our mind that the WAO across all of Wales are looking at financial resilience of all councils, and we await that report. Our reserves are relatively low, they're under pressure, and I think moving forward we'll need to focus a little bit on improving our financial standing and financial resilience. Yes, the settlement is much better than expected, but as the executive member said, it is only 1 year, and we still have a number of ongoing financial challenges. I don't know what the future holds in terms of settlements, but I think there's a growing sort of expectation that perhaps the austerity we have experienced in the last 10 years is not going to be the same going forward. We will see some investment in public services, and obviously if there's investment in England in things such as the NHS or social care or schools, that will have a consequential down to Wales. And it would appear that the Welsh Government are supporting local government, certainly in a way that's perhaps not the case in England. Some reasons to be hopeful. We talked about the national investment and Welsh Government support, and of course we've got our T22 programme as well, which is developing. But in terms of just running quickly through the report, it is a lengthy report, but it's also taking members through quite a journey. The first part of the report is all about the financial position for 2019-20, and it's an improving position from earlier monitoring, but still represents a challenging position with a significant potential adverse variance expected at the end of the year. The largest part of the commentary within the report then is in relation to social care and housing, and particularly children's services. There's a whole section on the activity taking place under the banner of T22, and there's a significant amount of work going in there, and that it is starting to have a tangible effect. But there is a long lag and leading times in terms of these things. But I am confident that we are, turning that corner and turning the curve, and are going to start to move down the other side. Then there's a little bit of commentary on what Keith himself, with his senior officers, have done over and above T22, focusing purely on some short-term stuff in relation to 1920. There's a section then on neighbourhood services, which is the other area with a significant adverse projection, but that's significantly better than it was in the early part of the year, and that is down to an action plan put in place which has taken a lot of cost out. There's a small section on reserves. Members will see that those reserves are falling down, and that is without factoring in the adverse positions that we've got, because we'll do that at the end of the year, and obviously we have to fund management of change arising out of post-16. 4.4, there's a section on how we're going to look to address it. Obviously, service area reserves will be used. Also, any favourable variances that are within some other services will have to fall to the bottom line. We have to address this as a collective. If we have any windfall receipts during the last part of the year, I'm not talking about capital receipts, then I'm talking about revenue windfalls, we'll allocate those straight to help. Obviously, all services will continue to push down on their in-year expenditure to try and help. And obviously, it'll be the general reserves and the consolidated reserves of the council to pick it up. And moving forward, we must only use reserves now if they're going to positively assist our underlying position, budget stability, or the transformation of services. There's a small reserve usage approval then in 4.51. Moving then on to the estimates. Obviously we started with a medium-term financial pressure at the start of the year, and the numbers are there. And then we had the estimates produced, and there's a table then at 5.2 which shows that initial gap, and it gives the assumptions that we made at the time. There's some commentary then on the general election and what that did to the timing of assumptions, and that at the time then we assumed that we wouldn't get a cash flat line, we might get plus 1%. There's then a section on issues we put in train to try and address the medium-term financial plan and work towards it. So we looked at all our borrowing costs, and we decided, working through that, we could take off nearly £500,000 from that. We received the pensions actuarial valuation, which shows that we can have a freeze in contributions for 2 years, so we've made allowance for that. We are approaching the Welsh Government around domiciliary care, so that pressure. And we obviously, at your November meeting, have the council tax base. We've got more properties, and therefore we've got more tax yield coming in. And we asked all services to look at 1%, 3% and 5%, and we decided we could take the 1% because they were modest service change. They're in their Appendix 1, and they totaled 800,000. So at that point in the process, we had a gap then in that table that reduced the shortfall. We then set off reworking effectively the estimates and having a look at any assumptions that had changed and moved, and there's a set of paragraphs there. We took off 1.2 million by just reworking inflationary pressures, relooking at things with the passage of a few months from the estimates. We made a number of financial adjustments, the biggest one bringing forward an element of the T22 support services financial target into 2021, and some small service adjustments that are listed there. In 7.7, there are then really the concluding things we were thinking about at that point in time to balance the budget. As part of T22, looking at procurement and putting in a savings target of £500,000, around procurement. Now that will be, in some cases, smarter procurement, putting stuff on contract, but it could also mean just challenging why do we need to spend some of that resource. Any saving on third-party spend has got to be better than saving on staff spend. Property maintenance fees, that's been a pressure for a number of years. It is not going to be solved in 1 year, so we're looking at reserves, 100% in 2021, 50% in 21-22, by which time the service area will have addressed the pressure for 2022-23. There was a pressure in around children's services, and we think with all the T22 work that's gone on, that pressure can be removed. We still think there is scope for social care grants to come in. The Ash dieback pressure, to treat that in a different way rather than treat it as part of the recurring budget, and absorbing the pressure around children's and communities grant within the grant. All of those areas moved us towards a reasonably and a close to a balanced position. We then had the provisional settlement on the 16th of December. It was better than expected, significantly better than expected. And as the report acknowledges, Welsh Government has clearly prioritised local government within their funding, and they funded a number of things within there. We'd made an assumption that we'd have 1% on the general fund and 1% on schools, but we'd also made an assumption that the Welsh Government would fund the teachers' pensions, which they did. So effectively, we'd assumed 2% and 1%, 3%, and the settlement is 4.5%. So that obviously gives funding for further member consideration between now and the Cabinet of the 11th of February. There's a little section on schools which essentially says that the position is that the pressures that were all estimated as part of 2021 can be fully funded as a result of this settlement. Small section on cabinet, and then some conclusions. So I mean, we're in a very decent position as a council. I think our decision to await the provisional settlement before we started any consultation on the budget was a sound one. However we determine the funding and resource and what that does in February and moving forward into March, we will need to drive and achieve all the assumptions in here. There are still a number of significant assumptions. I've touched on procurement. They need to be driven and achieved. Because we cannot afford an overspend in 2020-2021. So we do need to achieve that, whether that's in the service areas or whether that's corporately. And then it's happy to put the recommendations.
Okay. Any comments or questions for Kelly or Nigel?
Yeah. We were all surprised, I think, and gratifyingly so, that the settlement was better than we'd anticipated. But I hope there's not going to be a knee-jerk reaction to that. I think we need to be very measured in the way that we look at our finances and resources. In the light of that, number one, because we can't rely on this being the start of an upward trend. It could very well be a one-off. Plus the fact that now with Brexit happening, we have to keep a weather eye on what's going to happen there as well. So have you got any comments on that?
Treasurer's knee-jerk? I mean, it's surely not. I mean, I think I made a comment in my introductory remarks. We do need to have a focus on our financial standing and financial resilience, and we do need to be sensible, and we do need to drive all this with resilience. I don't know whether it's going to be an upward trend going forward. My guess is that the days of -1s, -2s, or even cash flat lines may be may be coming to coming to an end. We'll be a long way from real terms increases, but we've got very used to managing without real terms increases. As for Brexit, I don't know, but all the movement again, the promises for whatever they are that they're going to make up whatever shortfalls there are. I mean, we have to wait and see on a whole range of things. The budget, I understand, is the 11th of March. He's announced today that the budget will be 11th of March, and we'll just have to wait and see.
My concern is where is it coming from? Where are they coming from?
Forgive me, I'm not the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
There's feedback on my mic. Someone obviously doesn't want to speak. But can I just thank Nigel and Kelly for the report and for their work, Days and the team across the council. I would like to. I think it's right that we welcome the settlement from Welsh Government. They have made a clear priority of the services that we run, and I think it's right that we thank Julie James and the other ministers in the Welsh Government for putting their money where their mouth is, if you like. It's clear that we share the priorities of the Welsh Government about protecting the vulnerable, about things like education, housing and other vital local services. 6 of the Welsh Government's 8 priorities outlined by Rebecca Evans recently can only be delivered working with local government. So it's good that their prioritisation and their budgeting processes are tied in, perhaps more than we've seen in the past. And I think it's right that we welcome that, and we thank the Welsh Government ministers who have really stuck their necks out to back us financially. I think the onus is on us to deliver on that, working with them. I also think it's a recognition of the challenge that we've articulated about the future of local services. The campaign last year was about services being at breaking point, and I still believe that's not an exaggeration. After 10 years of austerity, I really think services were and remain at breaking point. It brings me to the point that David Yole made just now. I think we can't just view this as the good times coming back. This is at the end of 10 years of austerity, so I think continued discipline and clear prioritisation is going to be key. And of course, prioritisation is a word that people often use just thinking about the nice side of it, but of course there's the hard-nosed side of that as well. Was it Nye Bevan who said that socialism is the language of priorities, or priorities are the language of socialism? I've just butchered a quote there, but I think it's right that we don't just sort of take a sigh and just relax, that we use this to really target where we think the spending should go and how we can safeguard services going forward. I would like to thank officers to echo what Kelly said for their work on this budget in very uncertain times, both because of the budget situation, the general election late last year made it even more uncertain than things usually are. And I think that the approach that we took in those times is bearing fruit. I do hope this settlement isn't just a one-off and is the start of a new reality, a new sort of prioritisation of the services that local government run, and a recognition that we can only improve things in Wales if services like education, social care for the vulnerable and housing are funded properly. I think that's very important going forwards. I say that because of the uncertainty that other members have mentioned this morning, and that is on the horizon. I wish the Welsh Government had a medium-term plan about their funding that gave them and therefore us some more certainty. That would enable us to plan, I think, far better than the continuous sort of single-year settlements that we seem to get. Because after 10 years of austerity, there are big sort of systemic and structural challenges that remain in key areas. One thing I'd hate to see happen is that one better settlement makes the sort of the false choices that we've tried to reject sort of rear their head up again. Because whatever the settlement this year, it is a completely false choice to present that we could somehow freeze council tax and still safeguard vital services. that just doesn't add up, and I think we need to be very, very clear in that. What we do need to do over the next few weeks, as we lead towards the budget, is try and maximise the investment in those key areas, whilst minimising the impact of any council tax rise on residents. That's the real world choice, as opposed to the sort of fantasy economics of people who say you can have your cake and eat it. I think we're right, as the report says, to prioritise schools. I think it's vital that schools' pressures are met this year to avoid redundancies in our schools, and that's the reality of the matter. Without the extra £3.4 million that we're giving to schools, our schools would see vital staff being lost, and that would be a great impediment to them in their efforts to improve the quality of education for our young people. So I think that's right to be our first priority, and I hope we can continue those discussions about how we invest in our key priorities, whilst making sure that we balance the books and keep things sustainable going forwards. I just want to end with a word of thanks to the staff that work in this council, as I think is right every time we look at the budgeting situation. They've suffered under 10 years of austerity. They've seen fewer and fewer members of staff, more and more work, and in real terms less and less pay. And I think they are perhaps the real sort of unsung heroes of austerity. Lots is often talked about some of the brilliant public services staff that work in our NHS, in our police service, and in other services like the fire service. I think local government workers sometimes don't get the recognition they deserve, but they truly do keep our communities running, and they keep local services going, and they make a massive difference to the lives of some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And I think we owe them thanks for doing that job under tremendous strain and in very difficult times over the last decade. I think it's right that we give them that thanks, because sometimes you don't hear enough about the work that they do. But I would like to thank members for their efforts in this budget. There will be a sort of intensive period now of us trying to piece things together, but residents can be assured that we will do our very best to make sure that services are sustainable going forwards, to make sure that investment is targeted in key priority areas, and to maintain the financial discipline that is necessary in order to do that. Any other questions or comments? If we move then to the recommendations. Let me just... The recommendations then are at 13.1 of the report, that the position outlined in respect to the 1920 revenue forecast is noted, that the current positions in relation to the 2021 budget and the medium-term financial plan are noted, that the identified 1% mitigations are endorsed with a view to implementing the changes effective from the 1st of April 2020, and lastly that we approve the reserve use outlined in paragraph 4.5. A show of hands. Thank you. Thank you, Nigel. If we then move to agenda item 7, which is the risk management report, and I'll hand over to Jo.
Thank you, Chair. The report is to note an overview and update of our risk management process and give assurance that the process is effective. We're required under the Local Government Measure 2009 to demonstrate we have appropriate arrangements in place for both strategic and operational management. Risk management is an essential part of good corporate governance, enabling Council to determine its appetite for risk and put in place appropriate measures to manage and mitigate those risks. There have been a number of improvements introduced since the last update to Cabinet, one of which includes a treat or tolerate approach. Some risk will always exist, so to tolerate a risk accepts that it cannot be eliminated or reduced, or to treat a risk identifies the measures to reduce and, where possible, eliminate that risk. The last report was presented to Cabinet in October 2015, where Cabinet recommended scoring and weighting each identified risk. This was implemented and enables ongoing effective challenge. The relatively newly formed Corporate Governance and Risk Management Group meets 4 times a year. Moving forward, to close the loop and further enhance governance, the Exec Member for Corporate Governance and Performance will receive a briefing following each of those meetings. This report will be scrutinised at Audit Committee in March this year, and I'd like to thank the officers for compiling a comprehensive report, and I look forward to regular updates at future Cabinet meetings.
Thanks, members. A much shorter report than Nigel, so I won't take very long going through it with you. I think the key thing that we wanted to put over is that there's no real reason that you haven't been receiving reports since October 2015. That sounds such a long time. But Audit Committee are the committee that look at our risk management processes to ensure that, they're up to standard. But what we did think it was, with new executive member, it would be useful for you all to have an update on where we are with things. And things have changed enormously since the last time you looked at the risk register. A lot more work has taken place, as Councillor Gordon has said. So really, I won't talk you through it as such. We have got a working group now that is a corporate governance and risk working group. We still meet quarterly. We still go to leadership team quarterly. We're going next week. And really, as if you have any questions or if there's anything that you think we haven't covered that you might be interested in knowing.
Any questions or comments? I think risk is kind of the kind of thing that only sort of rears its head when things go wrong. But I think appropriate appetite to risk, acceptance that risks do exist, and appropriate actions to mitigate them without being crippled by the fact they exist is very important. So thank you to Kath and to Joe for the work that's gone on and all your teams in this. If we're okay to move to the recommendation then at 12.1, that we note the work undertaken to improve the Council's management and monitoring of the Council's identified risks. Show of hands in favour? That's great, thank you. If we then move to item 8, which is the Teacoke Solar Farm. If I bring in Fiona first.
Thank you, Leader. I'm really pleased to see this report being brought to Cabinet today. A few years ago, the Council embarked with Welsh Government support on a study to identify land that would be suitable for renewable energy production. Recognising that whilst we have made great strides within our own buildings and street lighting on energy schemes, further action would be needed to contribute to the national carbon neutral targets, as well as now responding to the recently declared climate change emergency by this very Council. Appended to the report is a highly detailed final business case, which outlines the 5 key areas: financial, economic, strategic, management and commercial, and justifies why the project is proposed to progress. Strategically, this project sits within our clean and green priority for protecting and enhancing the environment for future generations. Environmentally, this project, should it proceed, will generate 3.047 megawatt hours of electricity per annum, or enough power or energy to power nearly 1,000 homes. It's 982 to be specific, which is equivalent to a fifth of the annual CO2 that's generated by our council buildings. Commercially, the soft market testing has proven that the project is viable with strong interest from the market. I'm especially pleased that a key consideration of the procurement route has been the inclusion of SMEs and also local suppliers. So much so that the procurement route is different to that advised by Welsh Government, to specifically allow for greater involvement of the local market should they wish to participate. Financially, the modelling has demonstrated that the scheme would make a small overall return to the Council. The current model indicates that the project would deliver approximately £24,000 as a net revenue to the Council's budget. Therefore, environmentally and financially, I hope this project will be a win-win. The report asks Cabinet for 3 key things. 1, to approve the procurement package so that it can commence. 2, approve a policy position for officers to prepare a report for Council to commit to the Cabinet expenditure of £2.45 million to be financed from the Public Works Loan Board. 3, that should procurement return a net financial positive to the Council, that delegation is given to the Assistant Chief Executive and Chief Officer for Neighbourhood Planning and Public Protection to allow commissioning of all contracts. Importantly, Should the procurement not come back as expected, then a special emergency cabinet will be held for us to consider the financial position of this project in line with our priorities and the climate change emergency. As a keen environmentalist, I'm really heartened that we're making this bold a policy change and moving into a different policy space. Not many councils in Wales are doing this. The number can actually be counted on one hand. So this completely aligns with our new value of being innovative, whilst also delivering against our corporate priorities. If this project does progress, which I really do hope it does, then it can become a pathfinder for other energy projects of a similar nature. I would like to pay thanks to Scrutiny for their contributions. The final business case is a detailed document, and Scrutiny really understood what we were seeking to achieve and made a positive contribution to my deliberations on this project. I'd also like to thank the officers who have been working on this. As I've said, this is a new project for us, so there's been a lot of learning along the way. This only puts us in a stronger position for hopefully future projects. And I'll hand you over to Rachel, who will take us through the key risks and also the financial programming, so that we all have a thorough understanding of what this project means for hopefully the next 35 years that it could be with us.
Thank you, Fiona. I think we just had an item on risk, and this is definitely one which is taking us into that territory. If it does progress, I've no doubt it'll be on the risk register for monitoring and for future. But I think just sort of like to step back, let's just remind ourselves the solar farm is proposed to go on the old landfill site at T Cork in Llantarnam. It was allocated for employment use, but there was never any interest in it, and therefore we were looking for a better use for that site. And when the Welsh Government with the team were doing the modelling, it came out as a really good prime site for a solar farm. Obviously, as Cabinet are aware, we have a significant strategic partner at that site, the Monmouth and Brecon Canal, and the trust and all the work of the volunteers. At one point, the solar farm was proposed to be bigger than it is, but then there was a discussion with the canal and their aspirations for further works at T Cork, and obviously they've got a high level of volunteer interest, and they're doing a lot of work at T Cork with the building of the shed where they do maintenance and a lot of outreach activity. They have grand aspirations for T Cork, and this solar farm would allow those aspirations still to be continued, so that's important. And actually, you know, who knows where our energy could be pumped into the future rather than directly into the grid. So, you know, the Canal Trust, we've worked really closely with them to keep this on board. I have to emphasise one of the key risks is the financial profile. All this is at the moment is modelling, but you know, the one thing I can guarantee is that the figures in the report will be different to that which we sign, but how different is dependent on the procurement process. However, Alan and the team have done a lot of soft market testing and engagements. The figures are based on what the market is saying and what also other authorities who are going through this process or who have gone through this process in terms of what they have covered. We have received an offer from Western Power for the grid connection, so that is a certain cost within the report. I will say it's mainly the cost of the equipment, the panels, and also the income we received in terms of the power purchase agreement. All of that will be resolved through this next process. The one thing I have to say is that, you know, the panels are bought in euros, and we will be procuring during the Brexit period. So that is one we will be monitoring. Okay. As Fiona says, the modelling does show a net return of about £24,000 per annum to the authority. That's when the figures is smoothed. However, what you'll need to appreciate in Appendix A of the final business case is the cash flow model, is that for the first few years there will be a negative, and then it turns into a greater positive, and this will be absorbed and managed by the department's budget, and then in future years when there's a net benefit, this too will come into the department's budget for us to then use and sort of like put forward to savings or other initiatives. So it's just important you understand it's not 24,000 net benefit from day one. There is a period where there is a cost to the authority, and then it ramps up as the project matures. We also have to manage the risk of building on an old landfill. The construction route has been designed to take this fully into account, so we're not going deep into the ground, we're just going slightly under the ground. I'm looking at Alan because he's our technical expert on this, but it is one obviously we are very conscious of and have worked hard to mitigate that. I will say the financial model is prudent. deliberately so. We'd rather it be prudent and come out better than be really optimistic and then deliver the worst. And we factored in full life cycle maintenance and replacement of key parts in the cycle which they have to be done. So all that has been built in. In terms of next steps, if Cabinet approve, then officers will begin the procurement, and as Fiona has explained, we will not be signing any contracts until we run the full financial model again, take it through due diligence internally with finance to ensure that this stacks up, and hopefully it won't, but if it doesn't, then of course we will bring it back to an emergency Cabinet. I will say, if there are any technical questions, Alan is here, and I will say Alan has been the project manager for this project. We also have had support from Welsh Government and advisors, which we have to on a process such as this. But hopefully, if this does go ahead, then we do have other bigger sites where this could be a pathfinder.
I just want to make the clear point around the net income, because I think in more accessible terms for the public to understand that includes paying back the cost of the project, and that income is on top of that. So just for the sake of the public, I think that's a point that really needs to be hit home, because I think, I've had constituents say, you're putting £2.5 million into it and you're only making 800,000, and I have to explain to them. So I think, we need to make clear that that isn't the case. And on top of that, I think the climate change aspect of things is I'm also an environmentalist, and I'm very passionately so. That's very important to me, and I think the income aspect is almost a sort of a side thing, really, because in the bigger picture, this is what this is about. Another point that I feel needs to be made is the increasing instability of the energy market. I think that this is a 35-year project, so that covers a lot of change, and with energy likely to be increasingly dependent on the politics and geopolitics of the world, I think it's even more important that we're investing in local projects and UK-based projects, because I think in terms of stability of energy production, I think that is a point that really needs to be made for projects such as this and any future projects.
I was pleased to hear about the involvement of SMEs and the intention to make it as accessible a project as possible for them, because that's great. But really, just to echo what David said, paragraph 5.15 makes the case for me. If it's a 21% offsetting of our CO2 from the energy that we use, then that alone makes it a very valid thing. And as David said, any money that we gain to help our revenue budget net of that is a bonus, but not the main point to me, especially if this can be a bit of a pathfinder and show the way for schemes in other areas as well as our own. So I'm very much supportive of that. Any other questions before we go to the recommendations? The recommendations then, if I scroll down quick enough.
That's a big form.
Yeah.
Very detailed.
Are at 12.1. It's recommended that Cabinet support the final business case at Appendix B. I move to the next step for the delivery of a 3.04 megawatt solar farm at Teacote former landfill site, and give the approval to proceed to the next phase of the scheme as described in the report, to include A, the approval to procure all packages which support the project, and B, the approval to proceed to Council for provision of a capital budget of 2.54 million to be financed from a dedicated Public Works Loan Board loan. This will cover development costs to date to be capitalised and build costs to the commissioning of the project. And 12.2, the report also seeks approval to allow the Assistant Chief Executive Resources and the Chief Officer Neighbourhoods Planning and Public Protection to allow commissioning of all contracts should the outcome of the procurement process deliver a positive net financial return to the Council over the lifespan of the project. If the procurement process determines that the Council would need to contribute to the running cost of the solar farm, a special emergency Cabinet will be called to determine the project in light of the Council finances and its climate change emergency declaration. Are we all in favour of that? That's carried. Thank you very much. And that closes today's Cabinet meeting.